Namaste and a very good morning to our esteemed speaker, Professor Gitanjali Gill ma'am, Professor of Law, Northumbria University, UK, Dr. Mayuri Pandya ma'am, Director, Faculty of Law, GLS University, all the participants and the viewers who have joined us on the live streaming of the plenary session 2 of the virtual international conference on climate change governance and law, titled Climate Change Through Sustainability Transformations Lens in India. Ma'am, I warmly welcome you on the official e-platform of Faculty of Law, GLS University. Now, without wasting much time, I would like to request Dr. Mayuri Pandya ma'am for her welcome address. Ma'am is an exceptional academician who is rendering
That's fine. Thank you, Hiral. Thank you so much. We don't want to waste any time of Dr. Gill. Dr. Gill, I welcome you officially on this e-platform of Faculty of Law, GLS University, to this plenary session 2. One personal thing would like to share with all the participants and the viewers that Dr. Gill is one of the very good friend, and she is the backbone for today's international this conference. She has contributed a lot academically and otherwise also. She is backbone. In one word, I can say. And Dr. Gill, so far as your expertise and your work for all these years as a professor of law, and especially your contribution to the environmental law, is enormous and commendable. We welcome you to this plenary session too, ma'am. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and to be with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I would like to request Dr. Ridhita Parikh ma'am, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Law, GLS University, for her opening remarks for this session. Ridhita ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Hiral ma'am. India, a large emerging economy with great variety of geographical regions, biodiversity, and natural resources. However, the country is also vulnerable to climate change risks. The climate change has serious implications on a number of sectors and resources. Climate change adds to a list of stressors that challenge our ability to achieve the ecological system, the economic, and the social objectives. Climate change, a big concern in achieving sustainable development, though there exists a twin relationship between the two. And hence, we have Gitanjali ma'am over here, who will be beautifully addressing the second plenary session and talk about the climate change through sustainable transformation.
Thank you very much. Namaskar. Oh, should I start?
Ma'am, just brief. Just I want to introduce to you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ridhita ma'am, for your opening remarks. Now I take this opportunity to formally introduce the guest speaker of the plenary session, Professor Gitanjali Gill. Professor Gitanjali Gill ma'am has been an academician since 1993, formerly employed at India's leading university, Faculty of Law, Delhi University, where she experienced a distinguished academic career, finishing her tenure as a reader in 2011. In August 2011, ma'am joined the School of Law, Northumbria University, UK. Gitanjali ma'am's research interest forms a coherent body reflecting the thematic issues, that is, importance of access of justice in environmental matters, promotion of social justice agenda, SDGs, sustainability and good governance in Asia with a focus on India. In 2013 and 16, funded by a British Academy grant, ma'am examined the casework and environmental jurisprudence of India's National Green Tribunal. Ma'am's research findings were published in Environmental Justice in India, the NGT. In 2019, this book was published in Chinese language. Professor Gill's current British Academy Research Grant 2020-23 involves India-based empirical research investigating and reach effectiveness and impact of rehabilitation and resettlement due to compulsory land acquisition, and many more. Ma'am, the participants and august audience are awaiting to hear from your vast ocean of your knowledge and experience. We are all ears to you, ma'am. Over to you, Gitanjali, ma'am.
Namaskar. Thank you so much. Before I start off, thank you to my dearest friend, Dr. Mayuri Pandya, and to the university, GLS University, for giving an opportunity to present some of my thoughts on this August session, particularly in the 75 years of India's independence. Today I'm talking about my presentation focuses on climate litigation from a sustainability transformative lens, and some of the examples from Indian climate change cases have been taken to explain my viewpoint. Let us start off by saying India does not have a dedicated, a comprehensive climate change legislation, though some of the environmental laws and acts address climate change facets, something like which are being covered under water, air, environment, electricity, energy efficiency, disaster management, and forest. With this background, let me start off with my presentation. So, yeah, next one. I have structured my presentation in the following way. Briefly, I introduce what climate change is, which all of you know. Then I look into sustainability transformation, the importance of governance of judiciary, then how sustainability transformation has been read by the Indian judiciary, followed by conclusion. Next, please. Next.
On it, ma'am. There is some issue. We are just resolving it. Yes, ma'am.
Next one, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Since morning, we've been hearing from our august speakers about the challenges for climate change. Climate change is not the only one. We also have loss of biodiversity, land degradation as huge challenges, and there is an urgent need for the society to respond to these global crises in order that we can have a sustainable life. This life which we are talking about is not primarily the present generation, but it also includes the future generation. So there are questions that come about. Does our planet Earth have the capacity to sustain human well-being? Can the future generation also have a good quality of life as what we comprehend? And it is here that it really becomes important that we go into the questions about rethinking about our lifestyles, the current modes of production and consumption. In the last session, somebody asked a question to Professor Pozo, what is the biggest challenge? And I agree with her answer that it is the onslaught of consumerism that has actually led to major challenges coming up in this planet Earth, and one which we are today focusing is on climate change. Next one, please. I am addressing today's presentation from a sustainability transformative aspect. When we talk about climate change, it has got different mindsets based upon legal and policy frameworks and climate change challenges. Global North and Global South, there is a common problem, but then the way the things are being addressed are in a very different way. In the Global North, the question about human rights arguments, alternative strategies, carbon majors, deceptive greenwashing, marketing campaigns, regulatory challenges in relation to permits, authorizing emitting projects, All these are huge issues. But in the global south, when we talk about climate change, we do have governance constraints, we have policy and regulatory issues, as well as sometimes ineffective management of resources. Having said that, we are also finding a change. And this change is in the recent trends, which are in which the global south is experiencing climate change litigation through the use of climate language, human and constitutional rights, disaster management, conservation, and enforcement of existing environmental legislations. But today, I'm looking into from a very different lens, which is the lens for transformation towards sustainability. And it is this debate, one of the debates, which has become center stage at the global level. Because the solutions have to be found out from a very sustainable manner in order that the society can thrive not only for the present, but also for the future generation. And if you look to the policy debates at the global level, as well as the scientific debates, you would find that there is a huge support which is coming towards the concept of transformations towards sustainability. The 2021 report, the UNEP report, says it's very important that people have to be integrated because human prosperity is important, but simultaneously, resilience to Earth's system is equally important. So therefore, there is a need for a holistic perception whereby everything, whether it's the society, whether it's the economic perspective or the social perspective, that needs to be merged together. Next one. Similarly, the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development also carries the message for sustainability transformation. It starts off by saying, transforming our world. It talks about a change to be brought for a better, sustainable future for everyone. Similarly, the IPBES report also talks about intergovernmental policy planning, particularly for transforming when we are talking about biodiversity. So the point which I'm really trying to make is that when we are addressing climate change, it is just not simply through a human rights agenda or through a regulatory framework, but we also are looking from a sustainability point of view, which envisions transformations. Next, please. What does this transformation entail? Transformation is essentially a bringing about a fundamental change. It's a change which we are talking about from a technological, economic, and a social perspective, and it includes the worldviews, norms, values, and governance. There are different authors from social sciences who have tried to define, like O'Brien or Patterson, but ultimately, everyone is talking about bringing a fundamental change to the way we think, the way we behave, and we try to incorporate what is the better way, a normative way of bringing about a transformative setup. Whether we should do a good or a desirable thing, and we should also comprehend what its impact is going to be and how it is going to work. So essentially, sustainability transformations is talking about processes of change in which the human society moves forward, not only for itself, but it also envisions a people and a planet-centered perspective where it's not only the present, but also the future generation which is able to strive. Next, please. And in today's time, increasingly, sustainability transformation is being presented as a solution. Climate change, as I've said, is very much on the horizon whenever we are talking about sustainability transformation, because it envisions bringing about changes that are able to meet the reduction targets, envisioning and shaping how we want to proceed further, having ambitious mitigation and adaptation efforts in climate change is the center in order to bring about sustainability transformation. But the real question that comes about is, how do we bring about this transformation? What sort of a transformation are we talking about? Are we talking about an incremental transformation, or are we talking about a radical transformation? When I say incremental, it is a step-by-step progression, small adjustments that we are making in order to bring about a change, in order to ensure that we are able to handle the climate change challenges. Radical transformation is essentially, in one go, you bring about a change. It's about structural shifts. It's about bringing about a solid change into the system and then moving forward in that regard. Let me give you an example. If today the governments throughout the world, irrespective, come out with a policy saying all houses need to be green houses, the question is, are people going to be able to afford that? Now, this kind of a radical transformation does not come up. Because whenever we try to bring a change, change is not easy. Change is reactive. Change can be discontinued. Change can also produce negative effects. And that is where the question really comes, what sort of sustainability transformations are we talking about? Next, please. In the Western world, it's the radical transformation which is really being supported. But the question really comes about is, what about developing and emerging economies? For example, India. It is not a preferred solution. And the reason why I say that is high population densities coupled with basic human needs create complex challenges wherein it becomes very difficult to refigure the relationship between nature, resource consumption, and emissions. And a very good example of this is the last COP26 which happened. The Western world came out with zero net carbon zero agenda, asking all the countries to follow it by 2050. Now, this sort of a decarbonization strategy is anti-equity and results in climate injustice for developing countries. And it is here that questions really become important as to for whom are we bringing about and by whom are we bringing about this sustainability transformation. That is why I propose a middle ground, that it's important that we bring about a change, but then this change has to be incremental in nature, where we have to have a focus on sustainability transformation. So within a broader narrative of transformation, we need to incorporate sustainability agenda, which must go in a step-by-step format. And the local sustainability responses need to be taken into account in order to determine how we move towards this transformative setup. Because first of all, it's very important to understand the values, the principles, the institutions. Then we also have to understand the determining of the context of ground reality Today, if a policy comes out, just a hypothetical example, in India, that everyone has to use a battery car, electric car, how many people can afford that? It's not only India, but within the Western world also, this debate is that how many people can really afford electric cars? Because technology comes with a price, and the price is the money aspect of it. It's not cheap. So we have to have the current ground reality. We need to develop capabilities to change. This capability to change is envisioned with not only with technological innovation, but leadership. And I must commend here the efforts of Prime Minister Modi in trying to bring about a change in relation to climate change agenda. There was a time when the world used to say India and China are not doing enough in relation to their commitments to climate change. But today, with Prime Minister Modi at its head, one finds a different narrative, a different language coming up on the global platform where India is able to show its commitments. Next, please. No, just behind that. And it is here that within this sustainability transformations, the governance issue becomes important. Governance is not the conference today talks about governance. The governance is simply not about judiciary. It is multi-level process. It involves a lot of actors, structures, and processes. Because there's a question wherever decisions are made, there are questions of responsibility and accountability. Though I focus on the judiciary because I feel judiciary is a crucial partner, Justice Preston has talked about and Professor Pozo has talked about the case law, but I say that judiciary becomes an important partner essentially under Sustainable Development Goals 16, because the target 16.3 places judiciary as an enabler. And this judicial intervention as an enabler, as a lever of transformation, can bring about changes in climate change litigation for the implementation, development, and enforcement of climate change laws. Next, please. Just back. Yes. As we are entering into a phase where we need to meet the Paris agreements in relation to reduction targets, strategic intervention from judiciary is important. And it is here that I would refer to two judges. Next, please. Justice Benjamin, which has given pragmatical solutions of how judiciary needs to be involved. We have to remember there is no substitute that exists for the court system. If courts are not involved, climate change would become a handicap for environmental jurisdiction. Courts can provide meaningful interventions in order to bring about a transformative rule. And climate change is one such example in order to do that. Next. Justice Preston also talks about, and you've already heard him, equal access to equal justice, executive, ensuring accountability, upholding rule of law, promoting values, environmental values, development of climate change and policy. And that is why governance through judiciary becomes hugely important. Next, please. Independent, strong, and specialized judiciaries play an important role, and India must take pride. I've been saying my last 10 or 12 years have focused on the National Green Tribunal because it's a role model, particularly for the developing countries, and also has been very much appreciated by the Western world. So we have NGT in not only the Supreme Court or the High Court, but we also have NGT, which has come up with commendable rulings in relation to environmental matters. Often this word climate litigation is used, and everybody uses it. But there are different ways of interpreting as to how we read climate litigation. If you look to the Sabin Center, where I'm working as a rapporteur, there is a different methodology which is being used, which talks about evidence-based. If you go to Grantham Center, from London, it takes a very different approach. But for me, I'm taking the broadest by combining everything together to talk about climate litigation as one thing, which raises material issues of factor law relating to mitigation adaptation science, accomplishing the goals of life, what we talk about healthy life and healthy existence, the use of climate language within the perspective. So even if the cases are talking about climate language, we introduce that element. Next one, please. If you look to what is happening as of today, there are 2,744 global climate laws and policies, 2,082 climate litigation cases taking place. And what we see is that since 2015, this is a process which is evolving and becoming absolutely innovative in nature. And this is being commendable because of Target 16.3 of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are being read in light with SDG 13, which is basically climate change. So what we are looking into is a new kind of a discourse which is coming, which is relating to rights, responsibilities, mutual obligations, equity, equality, flourishing of rights, but also including sustainability transformations. Next, please. Coming now specifically to India's sustainability transformation. If you look to India's policy, India has made the commitment to tackle climate change. And within their reports, the ministry's report, they say, we are using 3 integrated transformative initiatives. One is a low carbon shift. Second is reconfiguring technology and institutional mechanisms. And third is mutually reinforcing policies. Unfortunately, India does not have a dedicated climate law, but there is a move towards developing that as a law. Having said that, we know we have a very proactive judiciary. Often it is labeled as judicial activism, but then for environmental matters, this is my personal opinion, that it's a proactive judiciary which has really brought about a change. And particularly for climate change, climate language, the judiciary is coming out with judgments where we have the use of climate language, human and constitutional rights, disaster management, existing environmental planning laws, and resource conversation taking place and getting reflected in the judgments. But within this, what the judiciary is trying to do is, it's bringing about an incremental change, but which is supported by cumulative movements towards sustainability transformation in climate change litigation. Next one. And it is here that the judiciary is acting as a lever for transformation. And this it's been doing by 2 ways. The first one is the traditional way. And the traditional way is enforcement of law, transparency, legitimacy, and accountability. So what it's trying to do is it's having a transformative agenda by bolstering environmental laws and policies, strengthening the rule of law in order to ensure that there is the enforcement and implementation of environmental laws which reflect climate change. But secondly is the most important, which is basically introducing strategic actions with a very powerful agenda that is focusing on sustainability. It is pushing a people and a planet-centered agenda, which is trying to bring about a transformational change. Through this, it's actually focusing on a behavior change whereby one can think about sustainability in the longer run, as what I've said, not for the present, but also for the future generation. Next, please. And what we see is that within the judgments, by pushing this people and planet-centered approach, the Indian judiciary is talking about the question of good life and well-being, sustainable consumption and production patterns, values of responsibility, reduced inequalities, tax subsidies, carbon credits, and technological innovation. So the point which I'm here is making is that the Indian judiciary, in a very proactive manner, but in an incremental way, is acting as a facilitator, a lever of transformative setup that is pushing the sustainability agenda. And by doing so, it is placing sustainability and sustainable development goals at the center of judicial decision-making, which leaves no one behind. And I give 3 examples of how this sustainability agenda is being pushed by the Indian judiciary. And please note, whether knowingly or unknowingly, but there is definitely a move which we see in the cases that come up. First, next, please. The first approach which the judiciary is doing is being climate conscious. There is a high, Mary Robinson, the former Irish president, had said, we need to have a mindset that this is a real challenge. We need to recognize this because there was a time when climate change was being debated, whether it exists or not, for political reasons, particularly in relation to the approach taken by US. But we now know climate change is a reality. And if we have a complete awareness that helps us to understand, identify, and also respond to the root causes of climate change, we can bring about a prerequisite to drive a transformational change. So recognizing the reality rather than a perception is very important. Next, please. And within this climate change, the climate consciousness connects us to the broader problem at the global level, but having local consequences. But the climate consciousness comes with 2 feelings: a paradoxical feeling of externalization and leave no one behind. Externalization is a negative feeling of despair that the world is going to come to an end. And some of the judgments which you read throughout the world, including Supreme Court, says that this is, or NGT talks about, this is a major challenge which we need to handle. So it's all about climate destruction. And climate destruction is associated with the knowledge of death. So the moment we come to know about the knowledge of death, of that we people are going to suffer and we people are going to die of climate change, this creates consciousness. And the consciousness comes up in the form of bringing about a change in relation to that. But this is not only a negative feeling. It also has, climate consciousness also has a positive feeling of leaving no one behind, which is deeply rooted within Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals talk about integration, indivisibility, and universality. It talks about healing our planet and shifting our world to a sustainable path where people can live a life, a better life for themselves, and provide such kind of a life for the future generation. Next, please. This sort of a climate consciousness is getting reflected in the judgments that are coming from Indian judiciary. For example, Jaisimha versus Government of Delhi 2020 case, where the NGT talked about a direct link between livestock, methane emissions, and climate. Livestock account for 15.3 million tons of methane, which increases the surface temperature by 0.6 degrees, and it introduces that. But the problem is, how many people do they really know about? So what the NGT did was, it introduced a climate sustainability narrative. The narrative that we need to have an evidence-based livestock inventory that will take into account the dairies throughout India into account. We need to develop sustainability indicators which come up in the form of more nutritious feed, the way we manage the manure efficiently, composting, and using to produce biogas. So by raising this sort of a climate consciousness, it really introduced the element that yes, time has come that we need to realize it in order to bring about a change. The point is, if we are not conscious, we will never ever bring about a change. So the first point towards sustainability transformation is that we need to introduce climate consciousness. Similarly, we have lots of forest cases, court on its own motion, state of Himachal Pradesh, felling of trees, Rajiv Datta versus Union of India. I mean, the forest fires that have come out, the glaciers that have melted, and the courts have talked about adverse contribution which is taking place because there is a destruction of carbon sinks, animal habitat, medicinal plant. Though they talked about these externalization factors, but they also introduced about the positivity of saying that we have a deep and a complex interdependent sustainability domain. We need to manage our forests. We need to maintain the ecological stability. We need to ensure that there is a connection which is deeply rooted with other ecosystems in order for carbon storage or for flood risk management. So the point is that we are aware. Judiciary is making that niche of sustainability transformation, of bringing about that change. Next, please. Similarly, Ajay Khera versus corporation is also the concept of carrying capacity, how many vehicles we can carry on the road. We need to develop that evidence base. There has to be a climate consciousness. Again, Gaurav Bansal's case, which Justice Brian Preston talked about in the morning, that we need to develop objectives. We need to have an adoption of a national action plan, which will yield co-benefits to address climate change effectively. So the first point is that we have climate consciousness, which is an incremental move towards sustainability transformation. Second one, please. Next one. Climate accountability. Accountability is a very virtuous term, and it's a contested concept because nobody wants to be accountable. But then, within the sustainability transformation agenda, we have heard in the morning also, climate accountability is becoming a huge issue, and the Indian judiciary incrementally is trying to address this. It is critically holding actors responsible for their decisions in the greenhouse emissions. And it is here that this accountability is at the heart of emission reductions. What we are seeing is that climate accountability focuses both on the processes as well as outcomes. When we talk about the processes, it essentially is making all those actors accountable who have not performed their function properly. There have been acts or omissions on their part, which has led to unsustainable practices and non-implementation or non-enforcement of the laws. Outcomes are focusing on a very culture-based sustainability agenda, which brings in the idea of sustainability and sustainable development goals within the decision making. So there is a culture, the judiciary is trying to introduce a culture of compliance, long-term sustainability, which will help to drive a sustainable future. Next, please. Let me take two important cases. Hanuman Lakshman Aruska versus Union of India. For the first time, Justice Chandrachud has used the word transformative change. It talks about refiguring basic and social production system, implementation, compliance and enforcement. Please note, that helps to pursue the 2030 agenda of sustainable development, because we need to control this climate change that is taking place. Hanuman Lakshman case, I'm sure you are aware, the Mopa airport, which was to be built in Goa. But unfortunately, when it was being built, the integrated environmental parameters across sustainable development goals, for example, emissions from the aircraft and their anticipated impact on the forest and terrestrial ecosystems, were completely ignored in the environmental impact assessment. The Supreme Court upheld that this is going against the very concept of sustainability and the commitments which has been done. So the environmental clearance which was given to the Mopa project was undone by the Supreme Court, because the question was, the very actors or the very people who are responsible, who have an accountability to see that clearance has to be given proper, have not performed their function properly. Similarly, the Society for Protection of Environment and Biodiversity versus Union of India, it's a very important case because it deals with housing. India's housing industry accounts for 22% of carbon dioxide emissions. The government came out with a regulation where they excluded specific projects and construction industry from the requirement of environmental clearance. The matter went up before the National Green Tribunal, and the National Green Tribunal said it's very important that we need to have environmental clearance, because when we are talking about these projects, carbon emissions are introduced, and we need to look into the sustainability aspects of this. And that is where the accountability element came. Similarly, Sukhdev Vihar versus Resident Welfare Association, the waste to energy plant was given a heads up by the entity saying it definitely fits into the sustainability agenda as it follows the clean development mechanism. So through climate accountability, the Indian judiciary is asking all the stakeholders involved, or all the actors involved who take a decision, to follow the laws, to make sure that the law is implemented with a sustainability element into its fold. Next one, please. The last one is climate futurity. What sort of a future are we envisioning? We need to envision a future where we have realistic and desirable goals to attain. And in this, the Indian judiciary is trying to bring about a sustainability element. It's asking the authorities, stop doing wrong things, but also enabling an environment where we have a climate sustainable future. Next, please. And I have to say that this is very unique within the Indian litigation. There is no other jurisdiction, no other court throughout the world which has actually introduced climate futurity into its decision making. Hanuman Lakshman Asurkar 2020, earlier case was 2019. The Supreme Court said, come up with a sustainability vision in order to advance low carbon emissions and to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Adopt a zero carbon program, both for the constructional and operational phases for the Mopa airport project. Utkarsh Panwar is also another case where the court is asking the authorities to look into or promote non-coal fuel sources like PNG, compressed natural gas, and other sources that help reduce carbon dioxide emissions. So, what we see is there is a shift which is taking place within the sustainability discourse that is promoting the renewable energy sectors to bring about a change in that regard. Next, please. So, in the conclusion, I would say climate change is polycentric problem. It's multidisciplinary, complex, and political. Humankind is sitting at a crossroad. We need to pick up what we want to do, but then it's always, there are no easy solutions. Think about us sitting on the chairs and taking one decision, which can be challenging. Governance is moving. I would never ever say that nothing is happening in India. There's a lot happening in India, and we need to appreciate what is happening. So, as I'm talking about Indian judiciary, it is promoting transformative solutions. It is doing it in an incremental way. It's realizing that realism is important rather than talking in the air. And through the realization, it is stepping in to create sustainable niches, not only for the present, but future generation. Therefore, the judicial contribution is hugely important, both for the actual and the potential cases that would be coming up in that regard. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an enlightening session, and I'm sure the viewers have benefited from the same. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Forum Pandya, ma'am, to offer the formal vote of thanks. Forum, ma'am, over to you.
A very good afternoon to respected ma'am, Professor Dr. Gitanjali Gill, and to everyone viewing the plenary session on climate change through sustainability transformation lens in India. It is indeed a privilege for me to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed speaker of the session, Professor Dr. Gitanjali Gill, Professor of Law, Northumbria University, United Kingdom, on behalf of Faculty of Law, GLS University. Ma'am, I thank you for sparing your valuable time and delivering such an enriching session on measures to mitigate climate change while keeping sustainable development goals at the center. Climate change has forced the humanity at large to act collectively to preserve the environment and protect it from further damage. Ma'am, the way you conceptualized and expressed your valuable insight on climate change and sustainability in India is very pertinent in today's times. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
With this, we are ending the very informative plenary session too, ma'am.